Good evening, folks. This is a special council meeting regarding, basically the first thing on our agenda is the Wheelock Watkins drain. And they have Tamie Heazlit, also correct? Wilson? Okay. She has been heavily involved with a number of communities. Her credentials are knee-deep with experience and education. And she's here this evening to give us some ideas of effective solutions for a healthier watershed that has everything to do with the Wheelock Watkins drain. And she's here to give us some ideas, maybe give us some ideas where to go, what we can do that's different than what we've looked at previous. And from that, hopefully the information that she gives us will help us make decisions as to how we're going to handle the Watkins drain and go forward.
You call for order then?
Yeah. And I call it to order, right? I did.
Yes.
Okay. The public inquiry. If we have questions after, I'll let Tamie decide that. If she wants to answer a lot of questions, she's going to just give us information as what municipalities and other types of businesses, what they run into, and how to solve some of the solutions, and what's out there that we can do to make our system much easier. So with that in hand, would you like to step up the microphone? Would you like to sit there? How would you like to
I
do
have a
this?
pretty booming voice. I probably don't need to, I have to try to whisper. So, green infrastructure has become so prominent in the U.S. at this point in time that there was even a conference at the White House last year, which is amazing. Cities all over the United States for the last 10 years have been using what we call green infrastructure more and more to resolve stormwater pollution issues. Under the Clean Water Act, large municipalities had to get a stormwater permit. In 2003, small municipalities that had a population density of about 1,000 per square mile had to also get a stormwater permit. Michigan's program is run a little bit differently than what it is nationally because of our drain codes. And this has kind of impeded some of the use of green infrastructure as a way of solving some of the problems associated with stormwater. And when we say stormwater, we're talking about every time it rains, instead of the rain infiltrating into the soil, like it does in nature, instead it's running off of all non-natural impervious surfaces, like yards are considered impervious because they're compacted more than field, roofs, roads, anything that the water isn't going to infiltrate. When it runs off and goes into the pipe drain systems, it goes into our rivers, lakes, and streams in a big slug. That causes the stream levels to spike. That causes flooding of the banks. And because we're disrupting the natural process, we end up with a lot of flooding. So stormwater isn't just about pollution control, but about volume control. And prior to the introduction of green infrastructure into the thinking of how to manage stormwater, we were all focused on pollution control. Everything that falls on the surface is going to get washed into the rivers, lakes, and streams. Well, volume control is really what it's all about, and that's where green infrastructure comes into play. Now, when I refer to green infrastructure, you've got your gray infrastructure, pipes and everything. White infrastructure is having to do with electronics and all the cables and everything that you have running through your cities. You've got blue infrastructure, which is actually the waters. And then green infrastructure on a large scale is connecting open spaces and trying to maintain open spaces as much as possible, because once a watershed exceeds about 8% in its development, it's going to start degrading. You're going to start having problems related to that, not just environmental, but physical problems within the watershed. So green infrastructure started out being this large connecting of all these open spaces. But then there's another aspect of green infrastructure, and that's where we try to mimic the natural conditions to the greatest extent possible in order to deal with stormwater runoff. Historically, when we first started to build the roads, and that's when this problem started, the idea was to just get the water out of the way, and that's when we started piping everything. Just get it out of the way, pipe it. Get it out of the way as fast as possible so that we can use our land and use our roads. And that's when it worked okay when we were small, but as we become bigger and bigger and more expansive, then we start dealing with, there's just more and more and more water in these pipes, and these pipes just can't handle the structure, or it can't handle the volume. And as you all know, the drains in this area are from what, the 1800s, 1865 or something like that? Yeah, and I mean, that's actually a problem all over the United States. We have an aging infrastructure. You know, you kind of keep hearing all these stories about pipes breaking and everything, oh, it's because of the weather. No, it's because they've long since exceeded their use, what they were designed to withstand. And we haven't funded or looked at how to replace this water infrastructure simply because it hasn't been in the forefront. Well, now we're having to, because all these issues are coming up. So what green infrastructure does in a location, instead of piping the water away, we try to do what's called volume capture. We try to find a way to keep the water as close to the source of origin, and then determine what we're going to do with that water. So if you're going to capture that water, typically we've been using detention ponds, retention ponds. You'll see those big ponds. Sometimes you'll see like a big aerator with a spout to keep the oxygen in it. But there's so many operation and maintenance issues with those. Who takes care of them? I mean, unless it's on somebody's private property or business property, nobody really maintains them. They become a real problem. So when we want to capture the volume on a property, if we replace the subsurface, you have a pipe that's got perforated holes in it, and you put down material, sand and gravel, and then compost on top of it, and you have landscaping material in between the different layers. You use native plants on top of it, and it's in a depression so that when it rains, the water runs to these areas. You can make them small, you can make them big, you can design them in a number of different ways. The rainwater goes to these areas. The plants are used to having both dry and wet conditions. Their roots go very deep, so they take up a lot of this water, and typically the water will be in these depressions for about 72 hours. These rain gardens have been used successfully in a lot of cities around the United States. Lansing's got a good program, and this Tower Rain Gardens is a highly, highly successful project in Ingham County that was a larger community than Goodrich. And since they've installed these rain gardens strategically located all around the community, not only do you have this beautification project, but the flooding's been eliminated. There's other means of volume capture. You've heard of the term rain barrels, maybe? Rain barrels are great, disconnecting a downspout so that somebody's house, what runs off the house doesn't go into the street. You can collect it in a small scale rain barrel, and then you can use it for irrigation. For larger operations, or even for a homeowner if they were so inclined, there are actually rainwater systems. We don't typically look at it in Michigan because we're so used to having this volume of water. We're a little bit cavalier about the quantity of water we have. Water is a resource, it's limited, we have no alternative, and we're treating it like a waste product. So if we can start installing, not everything today, but over the next 20 years, start installing these rainwater catchment systems, then we can start using that water as a resource. And it's easy to clean it up to a level where you can even drink it. There's filters on the market, a company called Sawyer makes filter systems that are extremely affordable. They're set up for large scale. They do a lot of small scale, but they do large scale. They've been set up to create water systems around the world in a lot of small communities. So you can actually collect your rainwater and use it anywhere from irrigation to flush systems to drinking water systems. So now you're saving on the water that you're using if you happen to be connected to a municipal source, although most people around here I think are on wells, would I be correct in that? But you're saving, you know, the water in your well. You're doing something with that rainwater that is useful. Instead of having it flood in somebody's backyard or flood in the basement, now you're saving it and you're able to use it as a resource. There's also things called green roofs. If somebody has to put in a new roof, and it's probably not going to be feasible for most homeowners because it's about 3 times as expensive to put in a green roof, but they also last for 3 times as long. They can last for 60 years if you put in a green roof because it's got such structural strength in them. One of the largest green roofs in the world is down at the Ford plant. For somebody who wants to go down and take a look at it, it's phenomenal. It used to be the largest, and now they've kind of been outcompeted by cities in Singapore and other places around the world. These green roofs are phenomenal, and they also have a cooling effect in the surrounding area. So now that we're looking at climate change, whether you know, I think it's man-made or not, it's something that we're going to have to deal with according to the scientists, and so this helps with that cooling effect. So it's also absorbing the rainwater, but it's also adding to a cooling effect, and if you're in a house or a building, it's insulating it. There's also places where you can cut out a curb and put in like a little modular wetland. So the water might run down the road on the pervious pavement, but then it goes into this little area where there's all kinds of plants that can take up the pollutants and deal with the rainwater so it doesn't get into the piping system. All of this are different designs to keep the water out of the piping system. And traditionally, when these programs have been designed around the country to deal with stormwater, there's anywhere from a 20-30% to 80% reduction in expense. There's funding available for it that there isn't available for traditional piping sources because it's considered more friendly, it's more successful in cleaning up the water so that it's not discharging into our Great Lakes or whatever your local water body is. It's more cost effective to install, it's more cost effective to maintain. It is true that when you install rain gardens, you have to include the thought of operation and maintenance in the installation process so that it's part of your design. One of the, according to the Water Environment Research Federation, the number one problem, I think it's 56%, and I may be misquoting it, but 56% of the operation and maintenance costs are associated with sediment buildup. There are very easy ways to drop the sediment out if you set up your rain garden so that you have a little riprap that goes into it so the sediment is dropped out before it gets into the rain garden. You're not going to clog it. So if you can include in the design of all these different rain gardens, the operations and maintenance, what you're going to call it, you plan for it ahead of time, you can greatly reduce what the expenses are going to be. Typically these things also don't require a high level of skill. If somebody has a pipe that gets clogged, you're going to spend, pipe breaks, you're going to spend millions of dollars of repairing it, and that's usually when someone will do operation and maintenance on a pipe, on the typical traditional system, is when there's a serious falter like that. So even though you have operation and maintenance scattered out over time, you can adopt Boy Scout groups, school kids are always great to use. Teenagers are always looking for some work over the summer, so that's an effective way to get them some local work. There's church groups like to sometimes work on these things, garden clubs like these types of projects. So there are ways to bring in more cost-effective operation maintenance as well versus having to use somebody who's highly trained and knows how to use a certain type of machinery or something in order to do the maintenance costs. So when I saw what was going on with Wheelock Drain, and I've been reading about it and everything, this is something that's being promoted all around the United States. There have been successful programs in Kansas City, in Portland, in Seattle, several different cities in Illinois, including Chicago and Minneapolis. Washington, D.C.'s got a great program. There's several in New York. So they're kind of spread out around the country more and more and more. Philadelphia is one of the top cities that has been, they were actually mandated by the EPA that they had to fix their problems because of storm sewer overflows. And they decided to just throw in the towel, we're gonna go all green, and that's pretty much what they've done. And it's been highly successful. And to bring it back home, this project in Ingham County, they saved 80%, was it, on the project? It's just a phenomenally successful project, and there's no reason why something like that can't be done here other than will. And so that's why I kind of brought this to the attention, wrote a letter in the paper, was asked to speak. I did a presentation last week, and then we're just trying to move forward, let the public get involved, learn about this, and hopefully be able to then work with the drain commissioner, get their approval, and move forward as we can.
And you said, I think you mentioned the labor that would go into this, if you decided to go forward, you could get local
Yes.
labor.
Yes.
You want to expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, one of the things that I think is really important, I'd kind of like to see a paradigm change. Typically when you have projects like this, you'll get a contractor, the contract brings in his people to do the work. I think that it's important that projects like this create an opportunity locally. There are a lot of people that are either unemployed, underemployed, students that need work. A lot of this work can be, we can do training, we can teach people, people can get new skills, and we will use locals to the largest extent possible. There's going to have to be a few of us that are trained so that we can train everybody else. But we want to make sure that we use as many locals as possible so that it brings additional benefit to the community. I've also been having a conversation, kind of playing phone tag a little bit with the American Rainwater Catchment Systems Association. And they do trainings on rainwater catchment systems, how to design and install them. If we're going to start doing rainwater catchment systems in Michigan, you have to have people that are trained to do it. For $1,000, an individual can take the first 3 class install rainwater catchment systems. With college kids or students, you know, that have to come up with college fees, and college fees are so high right now. And there's all these issues about paying back loans. This is a very cost-effective, affordable solution, somebody getting a trade, and then you can build on that trade over time. Michigan's a little slow, we've started the conversation about green infrastructure. There are some projects coming up in Michigan, but we're a little bit behind the rest of the country. We need to play catch up, but the only way we're going to be able to play catch up is if we have a workforce that's properly trained. So if we can create a young workforce here and help them to kind of build over time these level of skills, they're going to be able to take that. They're still going to be able to stay in Michigan if that's what they want to do, but they can take those skills and go to any of these different watersheds that are having flooding issues. I mean, you look at how much money Grand Rapids is spending on flooding last year. This year they're going to get hit again this year. There is an article in the Oakland Press today about Farmington Hills having a serious problem with flooding and their storm sewer overflows, which we don't have in this area. But they're just building a big underground 3 million gallon tank to hold all that. They're not even looking at any other options. I'm just kind of like, why? Why are we not looking? Why are they not applying everything that we know is useful and effective and cost effective? And this is the exact same problem that Kansas City, Missouri had, and they initially were looking at installing a 3 million gallon cistern under the ground to catch their stormwater before they said no and exchanged it for doing green infrastructure and had significant cost savings. I think it went from something like 56 million to 35 million, because they were able to eliminate so much of the piping system. And granted, Kansas City, Missouri is a much bigger, and they had much more involvement in what they had to do. So 35 million was a little bit out of the price range that we're looking at doing anything, obviously, but they're talking a much bigger area. So I guess then, am I clear? Sometimes I don't communicate effectively because I talk over myself. So do people understand what I'm talking about?
Can you expound on the mechanics of, digging out the area and putting in whatever, peat in there or gravel or whatever?
Yeah, it's a really simple idea. It's basically returning back to nature. If you kind of go out and you look in your yard or wherever the flooding is occurring, you see where it's coming from, you can notice little features on the surface, rills and gullies perhaps, or different patterns on the grass sometimes, and you can see where the water's coming from and where it's ponding. And then you can kind of calculate, there's ways that we have equations, very basic equations that we can calculate how much is going to run off given a 24 hours of, 24-hour 1-inch storm, say. And you want to calculate, you look at the weather patterns, and then you decide how big you need to make this depression. Then you pick out your plants. What colors do you like? What kind of plants do you like? You take and you dig out a depression. You put in a perforated pipe. You put in sand at the base. You put down a layer of landscaping material. You put down your gravel layer. You put down your landscaping material. You put down your compost mixture, your amended soil mixture for the plants. You put in your plants, strategically designed. Some people are better at the plant aspect than I am. I have one of my coworkers, or one of my colleagues is on his way, but he's the plant guy. He knows the plants really, really well. He's a biologist. And then after you have your plants, then you put down your mulch. You have to water more intensely initially to get the plants established. But the thing with native plants is once they're there, they're going to come back every single year and they're going to build on themselves. They tend to mound on themselves. So other than weeding and just your basic maintenance that you would have with the garden, you've got a depression now that is going to be more porous than the surrounding area. So when the rainwater falls into this area, it's going to absorb and the plant roots are going to take up some of that water. They've also done studies on some trees. If some people are interested in trees, there's some trees that are more stormwater friendly than others. They take up more water. So that's something else that is being used around the country. And SEMCOG, the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, did a study in Detroit, in Wayne County, and some in Macomb County. I don't think they did it in Oakland. I could be wrong on that. But where they studied the different trees, they used different trees to take up stormwater, and there's sometimes funding available for that. The American Recovery, I don't remember the name of the act, but in 2009 there was a new act that initially required that states dedicate 20% of their state revolving fund to green solutions. Now it's been reduced, as of 2012 it was reduced to 10%, but there's not, if we're coming in on the ground floor, there's going to be more money available through there, so those are really low interest loans to help pay for some things. And then there's grants available. The Great Lakes Restoration gives out grants for some of this money, for some of these projects, and there's more grants available for doing this type of project that simply aren't available for piping that water away. So there is funding available.
And you read the engineering report that the Drain Commission had authorized.
Yeah.
And in that, even with $1 million that has been estimated, it can handle a 10-year rain. And there was something about, you were saying that this is even,
Yeah, you know, the 10-year rainfall event is the low-end standard. I spoke with Sue Kubik of the Drain Commissioner's office, and I don't want to throw her under the bus by any means, because I wanted to know why they use the 10-year flood event versus 20-year or even 100 years, since we know the climate's changing, our weather patterns are changing. We're having larger storm events, we're having more intense rainfall events, so why are we looking at the minimum standard? And they determined that because the drains are so old and so substandard and so small, that the 10-year flood event would be such a dramatic increase in the flow volume that the pipes would be able to carry, that it should be adequate. But my concern is, okay, well, maybe it's adequate for now, but how long is that going to be adequate? Yes, it's a great expansion, but if we're installing pipes at this point in time and we're expecting them to last how long, 50 years? You know, I can't see that far into the future, but I know that there's risk associated with that. And it's, you know, I don't want to throw them under the bus, don't want to question their reasoning or anything, but it's not something I'm personally comfortable with.
and the gardens would be more
The
efficient?
gardens, yeah, the gardens I think are more efficient, and if you design your gardens properly, you can expand them as, you know, if the weather patterns change and you need to expand them, you can expand them relatively inexpensively, certainly much more inexpensively than if you have to put in a new section of pipe. It's much more cost effective to use biology and nature to address these issues than it is to use engineering. We have a tendency to over-engineer everything. Engineering is great, love engineering, we couldn't live without it, but there's always this kind of balance between engineering and science, and where do we draw the line? And in the case of this, it's becoming more and more apparent that we need to get back to managing our stormwater by managing the volume of water that goes into the pipes, if any at all.
This system that you're talking about, though, you are going to use a certain amount of pipe with your system.
You're probably going to have to.
Which understands that.
Yeah, you're probably going to have to. I think it would be unwise to say, oh, absolutely not. I would like to say absolutely not. But there's a possibility that,
Well, we still have something on the outgoing end of that drainage basin. We got to pick it up, and there's a section of that pipe that is extremely old.
yeah,
But with that said, that means that between the rain gardens that you're going to do on private property, which I'd like you to talk about financing on private property, but from the Ridge Road, Huron area to Saginaw, Huron Road area, that would be new pipe to be brought in there, because that's the oldest part of the
Right.
existing system.
yeah.
And that way, as we slow the volume down, we can use smaller pipe, which reduces our cost considerably.
Right,
But it will handle more water.
yeah. She'll put less stress on the piping system too. Well, I think that if I were to just do one yard, I could go to PNC and they have local programs where they will pay for, you know, they'll give out $500 grants for you to do 1 yard or something like that. You know, $500, I could do a nice little rain garden at my neighbor's. My neighbor has a ditch that constantly floods, and we're talking about applying for a PNC $500 grant. But when we're talking about working with homeowners to address a larger issue, I think it would all fall under the same umbrella of a larger grant to address the entire program. So I think that by applying for it as we have this many homes that are flooding, and we have water coming off a golf course, and when you look at it as a system of rain gardens, not just one rain garden. One rain garden might handle your house, but we want to create a system of rain gardens that collectively work together in concert to reduce or even eliminate in some cases the amount of water that gets to the pipe. Yes.
When you have a condition or there's a homeowner now where they have a sewer in their backyard and their water problem is because it comes up out of the sewer, what do you recommend for that?
I would have to look at the details of it to kind of see, but they have a septic system? Is that what it is? Or
This
just
is
a-
a storm sewer.
Oh, the storm sewer backs
Instead
into
of the
their
water
backyard.
going down, it comes up and floods this person's house.
That would be something where you would have to take a look at the topography and also the soils of the area. And then you might have to, I would have to look, I'd still have to look at the specifics of it, but there would be ways to redirect the flow away from the house. I mean, I see a lot of times, I see where things have been put in to where, because of the way it's been constructed, the drainage goes to the house instead of away from the house. It might be a bigger job, but it can be done.
And another question too.
Okay.
I know this is all about doing things the clean way and saving money. Now with the condition of our dam that we have here,
Mhm.
if someday we can't afford to replace that dam and they just go to a natural stream,
Mhm.
as far as plant life and stopping the erosion, and it's been mentioned about the contamination of that soil.
Oh, I'm sure it's not very nice.
No, but are there plants that can
Mhm.
correct that problem?
Mhm.
And can that not be a beautiful situation if it was
Oh,
done
yeah,
right?
yeah. And I think one of the important things too is that we've got a lot of students in U of M Flint or Lawrence Tech or any of the other universities around that need projects to do. And if we can connect up and develop partnerships with the universities where we say like, we have this problem and bring in some of these students that are looking for a situation. There's been some very successful mitigation using mushrooms, actually. So there
So with
are
that
studies
noted,
going on.
Are all these things gonna be taken into consideration?
Yeah, yeah, it's gonna be a big project, and it's gonna take a lot of people, it's gonna take more than me and my expertise. It's gonna take myself and, various different, I work as a private contractor, and we all kind of work together, and then we bring in different individuals based on what the knowledge needs to be, so that you're never paying for more than what you need. You're getting, the overhead is minimized because it's not a big firm, it's a bunch of private contractors that will answer specific issues, and we all kind of work together in concert to figure out what needs to be done. So we have engineers in training, biologists, horticulturists, ecologists. I'm a hydrogeologist. I have another hydrogeologist friend that I can call on. She's a soil scientist individual. So we have a lot of different people that we can pull from that have various different levels of expertise that when pulled together have the knowledge of everything that needs to happen.
Tamie, I know you're trying to arrange a meeting with the drain commissioner and so forth. You're on hold until they have the appropriate time to meet with you. And I think you're aware of what the current situation is. Engineering firm has completed their study. We have asked, and in a meeting we have asked for some ideas that we've given them to have a response, and we're waiting for that. But the way it stands now is that if we go forward with either one of these proposals that the engineering company came up with, we're looking at, with all the permits and everything else, we're looking at about $1 million to get this done. And it would be special assessments, the village would have to pay a proportion of the people on the drains would. Is it your experience, and I think this is perhaps what happened in Ingham County, is that can be done, your ideas and your approach can be done by the Drain Commission without going to these other engineering suggestions that they put out there? So far, if we're going to pay, and the village is going to pay, and the people that are on the drain are going to pay. If we do it the green environmental way, it'll be much less expensive than $1 million, I would assume.
Yeah.
So,
Typically, these projects have been as much as 80% less, as little as 20% less, but that's a big span. And
we invited Mr. Wright tonight. I don't think he would make it tonight. Is that right, Jackie? So obviously, we would like to promote, if we decide to go this way, to promote that approach to it and see if he'd be willing to move from the two proposals that he has to this. And I suppose when you meet with them, that would be part of your conversation?
Yeah, and I think the thing that the county drain commissioner, the bee that I'd like to put in his bonnet is that the county has a stormwater permit, and they have requirements that they have to do on their stormwater permit. And this can be a positive thing for some of their requirements as far as outreach, education, engaging the community. They can use this as a demonstration project, so there's a lot of potential for them to get benefit.
He speaks all over the state and the nation
Yeah.
as being one of the biggest proponents of this. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's all we gotta get these people to see is the benefits of this.
Would you do a feasibility first before you approach the drain commissioner? Otherwise, I mean, can it even be done? Do we know it can be done? I mean, would you entertain the fact of walking the golf course and kind of
Oh, yeah.
get something in the back of your mind going,
Yeah.
you know, so that when you talk to him, you can.
Yeah, definitely, I would wanna take a day to look at some of the properties and kind of get in my head what we're dealing with, where some of the flooding is happening, and understand what's contributing to that. And then my colleague that apparently hasn't made it, he's had a lot of work dealing with golf courses, so he's got a lot of experience working with golf courses specifically. So I would want him to walk with me to do that as well. So yeah, I would try to see what some of the properties are, where some of the flooding patterns are prior to visiting with him. But I think he can be sold on the idea, and I think they can become supporters of it. It just has to be presented to them in a way that it's like, look, we're not trying to rain on your parade. I don't want to be aggressive or stir anybody's pot or anything. But this is positive in a lot of different ways. Not just for this community, but for the state, the drain commissioner, for their stormwater permit. And I think it was the city of Flint that just had a ding for non-compliance with their stormwater permit. So the city of Flint might be, I mean, I know they're financially strapped, but they might be interested in partnering to a certain degree. I'm not sure how, but I would have to play with that in my head.
If you're, which I'm sure you're aware that there's over 60 different projects that Genesee County has
Right.
having problems with.
Yeah.
And some of those will be funded by the county because the county roads are involved and so forth.
Right.
If this is an approach that could be used, it certainly would be a huge benefit. And for financially, especially when you're saying, strap the funds as Genesee County is in Flint and so forth. So it's an ideal, at least, approach to look at.
Yeah, yeah.
Have you talked to Brandon at all too? Because they have issues there with, and we get everything from Ortonville.
Pardon me?
We get all the water from Ortonville. So I mean,
Okay.
I know they have some issues and they've been trying to get some money to do some work too.
Okay, yeah, no, I haven't spoken with them yet. Now, the only reason I write letters all the time and nobody ever listens to me.
That's not true.
Until you guys, yes. Oh, somebody's listening to me, so yeah.
And there's a lot of other people here that are listening too.
Yeah.
Drainage district too.
How many projects like this have you undertaken and how successful have they been?
I've been part of projects, and I've been studying these projects. I have directed others that are directing projects. This would be I haven't done anything this size, but I know that I'm fully capable of it. Since I've come back to Michigan, I've been back for 10 years now. I took care of my dad for 5 years. I'm 55 years old. Nobody wants to hire a 55-year-old that didn't work for 5 years because they were taking care of their dad. So having opportunities where I can actually exercise everything and studying it and working with others on these projects. So I've been actually doing the labor, installing them.
How
So,
successful have they been?
so far, they've all been very successful.
How many is all? 1, 2, 10, 50?
I'm gonna say 10.
You can Google, we did this, we did a profile on you, which you would expect us to do.
I would.
You can Google her name and come up with a profile. It's quite extensive.
I just thought if I asked her, she could just answer me.
Well, no, it's fine. I mean, if you wanted more information, it is on the web.
But she would be working with other engineers, and
Yeah.
I'm sure the drain commissioner would bring in.
Oh, yeah,
But
yeah.
some of the legwork is already done for you too, on how much the water volume is at this point.
Right,
the
right.
Pipes that are there, and their volume, and that helps them.
And some of the design parameters and everything, I'm not legally allowed to do some aspects of the design. I would have to have an engineer, and Don Carpenter of Lawrence Tech is somebody that I'm in contact with, and there are a lot of young, hungry engineers that are dying to have, they're new grads and they just want a project to do something like that. So my intent isn't to go out there and design everything and go, oops. My intent is to help coordinate, to bring in everything that we need to get a project like this done. So bring in the different experts that can do things. I'm kind of a coordinator. That's what I'm really good at, and I can say that I've done that probably in the hundreds, and I've done inspections on sites in the hundreds. So I've done more inspections than designs, and made more recommendations for sites than I've done anything else. But yes.
So you said the rain gardens are probably gonna have to go on private property.
Some of them might.
So do we have to pay the people if we show up at somebody's house and say, hey, look at this huge field and we could put a rain garden here and it would fix everything? And he said, screw you, you're not doing that.
No, I mean, it has to, obviously there has to be some sort of cooperation if somebody doesn't want you to put a rain garden on that property. Basically, why you would want to put a rain garden on somebody's property is because that's where it's flooding. So
But are
they're
we gonna
going
have to
to,
pay them to use their property for a
No.
rain garden?
no,
They're just gonna offer their property willingly?
if they want their flooding addressed.
Okay. I'm just saying, if someone
Right.
else's home, and I know a lot of people don't care if flooding's not happening to them. So
Right.
I want my neighbor's yard to be turned into a rain garden, but if he says, nah, I don't want that, then I'm just out of luck for the flooding in my yard.
If the flooding in your yard is coming from his yard,
Well, I have a storm drain in my front yard, and it fills with water and overflows and floods my yard and my home. So, and I'm like at the bottom of a hill, there's nowhere else to put the water. There's also a storm drain in the road, and the whole road fills with water, and you can't even like drive down the road because it's covered with water.
I would have to look at it to say the specifics of what we could do, but we would probably have to do a little encouraging if they had a curmudgeon that didn't want to work with us.
So far, the people on the top of the hill don't really care about the people at the bottom of the hill who are having the flooding problem. So that's why I'm asking, if the person's yard that is ideal for the rain garden says, I don't want that in my yard, well then we still have the issue with the flooding in my yard.
Generally, the places that are going to be ideal are going to be the lower areas, like your yard. If it's up here, we're not going to really need to put in any kind of a rain garden. There might be things that we can do to slow the water down from point A to point B, so that it's not rushing in there. Because the first thing you want to do is slow it down, the second thing you want to do is spread it out, and the third thing you want to do is soak it in. So we would want to look at how we can slow it down, and if this guy and this guy aren't going to participate, we just have to look at what we have to work with and design around that. I mean, it's pretty much what you're going to have no matter what the situation is you're going to always have site constraints. That's just a given. You're going to have site constraints. And so you take those site constraints and you say, okay, well, what can we do with what we have?
And my other question too is, if they do the rain gardens instead of updating the drain, so we're not gonna do any updates at all, we're just still gonna have over 100-year-old drain going through my yard?
No.
No, it's possible it might, given what the calculations are and what we see, one option would be that they would choose to remove that drain. Another option would be that they will replace parts of it. And I have to, not knowing where everything is.
Where she is at, you're gonna get great relief with slowing it down. The golf course is gonna slow it down. Then at Ridge Road, somebody else's house here, from there on down to your house, it'll all be new pipe, and hopefully that would be our first phase. And you should get all sorts of help because of doing that. And then maybe in 5 years, we have more money, we can make a bigger pipe from your house on down. You're gonna benefit a lot just from slowing the water down. And that's what she had said earlier about it at its origin. As soon as the raindrops hit the ground, that's where they want to start slowing it down immediately. So you're gonna,
Is there a rule of thumb about how big an area you need for a 10-year rain? The pipes is all calculated out, and you know how much you can handle through the pipe. How big a surface do you need for a 10-year rain?
It depends on how much is running into that, so it's.
Which others already coming in?
Yeah, I mean, it would depend on the site. There are calculations for overland flow. So we would use those, I would have to look at those calculations. That's, I mean, I'm a hydrogeologist, so that's kind of what I'm trained to do, is to look at calculations for how much is gonna run off, how much is gonna soak in, and how much we'll get from point A to point B. So that would be something that's very site-specific and depends on a lot of different factors.
So, however that balances one way or another, with us, it depends again, as you say, where it's located and where the water starts to gather.
This is my friend and colleague, John Delisle.
How you doing?
His company is Natural Community Services. He's an ecologist. Is that your?
Yes.
Okay. How many rain gardens do you think you put in, or bioswales, or whatever you want to call them?
35.
Okay. He knows exactly how many he's put in, so.
And they all took care of the problem? The flooding stuff?
Pretty much 100%. We have one site in the city of Detroit where we actually put in a Parjana system in addition to the bioswale, because what it was a parking lot removal.
Oh, yeah.
And it was basically it was consolidated clay from being driven on for 100 years. So, but every site that was actual, natural soil surface has been functional. As long as you design the basin to actually carry the volume of runoff, the native plants, and that's the soil media during the winter will soak up that amount of stormwater. It works absolutely. I mean, they're actually engineered systems. There's Darcy's Law adaptation calculation for rain gardens and bioswales.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions, if I may. I've been doing some research on these rain gardens.
Good.
And everything that I've read says that when you put these in, that everyone is strongly encouraged to stay away from herbicides because it can kill off the plants. If we're putting rain gardens on the golf course, they use herbicides.
So we work in situations in natural, like oftentimes you probably talked about green infrastructure when you came in here, and
Yeah.
in the context of natural systems, oftentimes what we want to do on a golf course or where you've got a road adjacency to a woodland, a nature preserve, etc. You somehow buffer the stormwater that's going off of the road or off of the lawn into a natural area, so it's not carrying pollutants into that area and compromising things, et cetera, et cetera. Now, however, we also do like invasive species control in natural areas where we use herbicides selectively all the time. We even sometimes in bioswales that have not been installed properly, not used the right type of plants for that particular system. There are contractors out there that install bioswales that don't really understand a plant material that's supposed to go in a bioswale. In situations like that, there was one in the city of Southfield where we came in and controlled some invasive species, Canada thistle, garlic mustard, and used chemical control. So that it's not exclusive where you can't use herbicides in a situation where there are biosoils. Whenever you're applying any type of pesticide, you want to, make sure that what you're doing is targeted, it's selected. So usually the folks that work in golf course situations are very knowledgeable about what they're applying, and they're going to try to be targeted about using that because those chemicals are expensive, whether they're herbicides or fungicides or insecticides.
Well, the other thing is too that we're going to be working with the golf course, so they're going to be part of the solution. I assume that we're going to be working with the golf course. John is Mr. Herbicide. He knows his stuff really well, his plants, and so he can have a conversation with the golf course, the managers there, and find out what they're using and everything, so that it can be part of the planning process, so that what's coming off the golf course isn't going to be harming anything in the rain gardens.
One of the biggest things, with the whole purpose of bioswales and rain gardens is that they have a buffering capacity, meaning, when it's on the street, it's, like a formally designed bioswale. On a golf course, one of the things that like Alliance for Rouge Communities, in West Oakland County, has been doing is naturalizing rough areas that aren't, if somebody's going to slice the ball, 100 yards to the right, it would be the only way you would get into some of these areas that are, quote unquote, part of the golf course land, but they're not usually played on. And so it saves a lot of money. They don't have to hire as many people to mow that, 5 acres that's along X, Y, and Z holes. If they naturalize it, well, it actually has a double benefit because, especially if there's like a watershed in that kind of takes water out of that area, or moves water, or say it's a wetland and moves water into that area, then that has a filter capacity because in order to maintain turfgrass, this how there is some chemical input. But if you can absorb that with plant material, plants are really good at taking up compounds and sometimes metabolizing compounds. And so bioswales or grow zones, what ARC or the Alliance for Rouge Communities calls them is grow zones. Basically, where you do a prairie planting, you plant native plants from seed because they're huge areas, right? They're like 2 or 3 acres. And doing plugs like in a rain garden would be really, really expensive to do. You could do it, but they actually provide a huge service because they're actually absorbing, runoff from pesticides before it gets into a water system and then causes a real pollution.
Another question I have is, I know council's been very concerned with the engineering report that was presented from the Drain Commissioner's office, as well as a few residents, regarding that they were unable to give us a guarantee that we wouldn't flood again.
Right.
Is that something you can do for us?
That's that 10-year thing that I was talking about, the 10-year flood
Right.
event, that's what they're upgrading to. And only the 10-year, and that's where I said I'm uncomfortable with the risk that's in that.
Mhm.
And that was one of the things that when I read the report initially, I kind of went, why are they doing this? So that's one of the things that I have a concern with, and that's one of the things that I like about putting in natural systems in a series of different.
But these natural systems, will you be able to provide us a guarantee that we will not flood?
We can provide a guarantee that if weather patterns change, we can amend what is there to absorb the excess.
So you can't guarantee that we won't flood again either.
Nobody can guarantee that but God.
Thank you. That was my point.
Okay, but having said that, we can attenuate and we can mitigate it to the greatest possible extent.
Okay.
Is this actually regulated floodplain, like it's designated under?
No.
No,
It is
they
not.
just have a lot of, you probably didn't get a time to read the report, but it's a lot of historical flooding from old pipes that have long since excessive.
I skimmed it, and I saw that was the case, but there's there's periodically.
Like 4 feet of water in our backyard, a couple feet in our home, at least once a year.
Once a year, and it hasn't seemed to vary from, even in dry years, you're getting that.
We get a lot of backup. I've presented photos and everything. I've presented this issue, I came to council in August 2011, and they are just now reaching out to seek alternative solutions that we've come back with an engineering report from the county that they petitioned for.
And see, something like what's going on in your property, you know, knowing just the little bit that I do specifically, is your property might be a perfect candidate for some sort of harvesting system. We're actually harvesting the water.
Now, are these coming in, now you, and I'm not familiar with your particular property, are you, where you're getting flood water is, okay, so it's in your house, so, but even, I'm assuming it's
It comes out-
right immediately around your house as well,
No, it's, there,
upwelling.
yes, it comes up out of the storm sewer. It shoots out
Because
and
it's-
bubbles out
Okay.
and fills
How
the
far
area.
away from your, like, foundation is that storm sewer?
I don't know, what would you say, 500 feet?
500, so
1,000 feet
ways.
away from it?
No.
I'm a girl.
No.
I don't
Okay.
know my yard.
Roughly, this is a good question. 100 feet? Okay, that's still some space. Is it, now between where that outflow is and your foundation, all turf grass, or like turf grass and then like a landscape bed around the foundation of the house, or?
There's nothing back there because
Okay.
I'm always flooding. We can't
So,
even
okay.
use our
Okay.
backyard. But we've got a culvert that I know that they'll be discussing later this evening that runs under
Walkout
Ridge
basement,
Road.
John.
That,
Gotcha, okay, so it is, okay.
well, there's a culvert and it allows the mill pond to flow into the golf course ponds, which overloads the drain system, so when we have significant rainfalls, it's already overloaded with water that shouldn't be
So
there.
part of the problem is that everything that's happening above your house before it gets to your house is all coming down out of the pipe that's reached its capacity and it's coming out.
That's right.
If, with proper planning, we can look at, and I don't know where you are in the system, but with proper planning, it's possible to look at everything coming up to that point, doing volume capture so that what's actually getting down to your house is extremely minimized.
The last question I do have is the funding. You said that there were grants available.
Yes.
And I looked, and I'm kind of confused because in what council passed out tonight, it said that this project cost Ingham County $6.3 million for their rain gardens, but I received an email today from the Deputy Drain Commissioner in Ingham County, along with the entire project, and it was $9.8 million. But with that said, I mean, that's a considerable difference, but with
Right.
that said, the funding and grants that are available, how hard are they to obtain, being a small community? If somebody like Farmington Hills applies, would they receive those grant funds before we do because of the amount of people and the amount of land that they have
Not
versus what we
necessarily.
have?
Not necessarily.
It's a DNR trust fund grant, right? Yeah,
For Ingham County?
was that DNR trust
I'm not
fund?
sure what the Ingham County grant was. Depending on what it is, I mean, one of the things you're dealing with here is Genesee County is considered, what's the term, in hardship. So that's gonna raise the ante for them. Two, these things generally do get addressed in larger cities and not smaller, but the EPA wants smaller communities to
To
start
apply.
doing it, to apply. They're encouraging small communities to apply. This is the kind of thing they like. Like, this has got grant written all over it, in my estimation.
And how long do you foresee something like this taking?
I don't know.
Let me interject for a minute. In the Detroit News on March 28th, that's last Friday, the city of Detroit received $1 million from the Great Lakes Restoration Environmental Protection Agency for their water issues. St. Clair Shores got $250,000 grant to install a rain garden and previous payment at the Monroe Park that they had there. So there's money to go around, apparently small, like the St. Clair Shores, and large, like Detroit. So their money is there for these grants.
GLRI got funded well again, so.
Yeah, they did.
And the other thing is that the numbers that came, that was in this publication, came directly, not from the assistant, or from it came from the County Drain Commissioner, Patrick Linden. The council spoke to him directly, and the information on this is directly from him. So whatever's on websites or other people are
This
telling them.
isn't the website,
I
this
would
is the
rely,
official
I would
report.
rely on the conversation directly from the drain commissioner himself. That conversation lasted for about 35 minutes. to get this information, so this is legitimate.
Can we properly have him come up and be introduced? We're kind of cranking our heads back, and he's important, and I think that we need to.
I'm John.
John,
And, you know, to address the particular drainage issue in that area, and I bet you there's other, if you're getting it, there's probably folks around it.
Oh,
There-
there's a lot of us.
I saw some of the impact on the, when I was skimming, but that particular situation where you're at, there's a system called Parjana. So in addition to rain gardens and harvesting can be very helpful too if you get enough people to do it, like a golf course would be a good opportunity to do it.
if it's in a large system.
Yeah, if it's a big enough, basically if it's a big enough system. But I will, if you get on me on an email chain, the guys from Parjana, the engineer from Parjana would be very happy to come out and look at that situation, because this system that I talked about where we put in the city where we took a parking lot out, basically where it was clay hardpan. And so it's not something you normally deal with. Like, it was clay that hadn't seen water in 100 years. And so it's completely tight, right? Well, that system actually works on hydrostatic pressure, where it pulls water up and down with the hydrologic flow. And even if the floodwaters are like higher than the system is designed to do, it'll still pull in. It's such an innovative technology that's even hard for them to measure how well it works. But it does work better actually in areas that are, which is really good. Bioswales tend to work better in areas where you can naturalize, where you can create a basin. Where if for some reason you can't do that, Parjana tends to work really well in turf situations. So in someone's front yard or in an area like an athletic field, and with severe compaction, with bioswales, you actually will eliminate some of the compaction by bringing in sand and compost, and then you're able to absorb the water. Well, if it's a lawn, it's going to be compacted because it gets used when it is dry. Then that's what it used to be very challenging to deal with. But this Parjana system where they're putting these, but they're almost like piezometers that are. But they have a pressure pump in it that works actually on the pressure of the ground, and it will pull the groundwater down. So there are different things that you can look at depending on what the situation is.
It's really kind of hard to comment specifically without going out there
Right,
and
to
looking
see
at
what's
each
there,
specific
but-
property is, because
Well, you won't be able to do that because council is unaware of many of the homes that flood. They seem to think that, or a few members of council have said repeatedly that there are only a couple of homes that are affected by this, but there are many.
One of the things that is important to do, like if you're doing a grant-writing process, or if you're planning a project as much as can be, permitted to access, it would be good to hydrologically map it.
Yeah.
So.
Better off what we're doing.
yeah.
So getting back, if I may, to the funding, the way that it's set up right now is if we go forward with the engineering recommendations, my understanding is that the Drain Commission selects one, they go out for bids, it's their determination of who is going to do it, and then they would have a meeting that would divvy up who pays what.
Right.
So much for the people on the drain, so much for the village, and what have you. Is there any reason, in your experience, why that same approach could not be taken with your process?
Oh, yeah,
I mean, we would still you would pay a special assessment, and we would pay, obviously, the village would pay a lot, but it would be significantly less than $1 million that
it should be,
we're
yeah.
talking about.
Yeah, it should be.
So
It should.
it's convincing the Drain Commission at a point in time that this is a legitimate way to approach the issue, rather than going with the other two.
Yes.
That's fine. So actually, the grants would help, but at the same time, there could be bond issues that we would have to do, the village, in order to pay for our share if it came to that without any grants that would happen to be out there for us to go after.
Correct. We would have to start identifying grant and money sources immediately.
Have done this, even in Michigan, but the really good examples are in Minnesota and Wisconsin. They've been doing this for a long time. As long as the homeowner wants one, they'll put it in. And if the hydrologic pressure on a particular property isn't as bad, they just don't dig it as deep, and they don't have to have it as large. But if they want it the same size, they'll just go shallower and have the same size garden, but it doesn't have to.
Function.
So,
Yeah.
and maybe this would be where the commissioner would come in, where do we determine, because I think in some ways this is a neat idea. So where do you have the places that is really suitable and would be more eligible, let's say, to prosper and work for that particular home or neighborhood, versus would there be a particular spot where you might come in and assess it and say, I know I can help with this, but we're concerned, we still got drain issues here, we need to maybe do a duo both on this block.
I mean, it's
Does
possible.
that make sense?
Yeah, it's gonna take an individual site assessment for each
For
one.
each area?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, Tamie, I'd like to
Yes.
give you the board's our thanks for you coming out this evening. You give a lot of information, a lot of it's brand new
Yeah,
information.
and John,
And John, yes.
he drove further.
Yeah. And what we're gonna do is take a look at this thing. I'm sure the office will probably get hold of you again and maybe get some names of people that would like to come out and give us these young people that are graduated from Lawrence Tech.
Yeah.
These people might want to come out and give us some ideas. And funding is a whole nother issue, so that's something we obviously have to look at. And kind of go from there. It's a great start. We talked about things that none of us have thought about, I'm sure. We didn't know that the rain garden is something that would be useful. Like, I'm not sure what a rain garden is yet. But anyway, I want to thank you for coming out.
But the pivotal thing would be the meeting with Jeff Wright.
Yeah.
We'll try to promote that.
Yeah. I think Jeff would be very,
She's on hold for that.
yeah.
Well, and I'll contact Don Carpenter too and see if he can give me a couple names, of a couple people that might be graduating that would be interested, that are, or even that have graduated, have been out for a year or so,
And the young lady in Oakland County too.
yeah, good. She's not so young.
Lillian, she's been doing it
Everyone's
forever.
a young woman.
She's,
Everyone's a young lady.
She's young at heart.
She's got a lot of energy.
Tamie, the other thing we'd like to
Yeah.
have you do maybe is,
Yes.
you got two of the board members, at least here from the golf course, is make an appointment with maybe their board and at least get a chance when it dries out, warms up, take a walk on the golf course and get some
Yes.
ideas. Because there's a major source of water that is
Yeah. Oh,
coming
yeah,
our
yeah.
way. And maybe,
Because there's so much turf.
I know there's ponds there
It's-
that could be made deeper, that's just my comment. But anyway, we want to thank you, we got some more things on our agenda.
Okay.
And we thank all of you folks for coming out. You had some very good questions. We got some good answers and some people that know what they're doing.
Yeah, I have brochures if anybody wants to take a brochure, and I have native plant rain garden references back here if anybody wants.
On the agenda, that's Friday. Next thing on the agenda is purchase of a server. I understand they're all ones.
This is from the company that does our IT work. I was going to put it in extra budget reference to survive that line. So I'm looking for a motion to purchase of the server.
We need a motion.
How expensive?
I need a motion.
I'll make a motion to purchase the server. Any seconds?
Support.
Motion been made, support. Roll call vote, please.
Baldwin.
Yes.
Anthony.
Yes.
Maury.
Yes.
Cirelli.
Yes.
Horton.
Yes. And at this point, the board is going to go into a closed session with our attorney. And so we're going to go to our other meeting room. So thank you for coming.
We're going to
And,
stay.
You have to make a server.
You gotta make a motion.
I need a motion, I will make a motion to go into closed session.
Or,
Roll call vote, please.
Baldwin.
yes.
Anthony.
Yes.
Maury.
Yes.
Cirelli.
Yes.
Horton.
Yes.
You're still here.
Yeah, meeting's not over.
closed, you guys do a poker game down there while we're waiting?
We could if we wanted coffee and cream.
Wait a second.
Okay, so can't eat all the donuts.
Nobody adjourned. Where's he going? Yeah, we got public comment. Oh, boy. We have a motion to go back to
Make a motion, we return to regular session.
Second.
Baldwin,
Yes.
Matthew,
Yes.
Corey,
Yes.
Siroli,
For the record, Mr. Herman was not in that meeting.
Okay. Well, I know, I ended up having a conversation with him. Thank you.
State law.
Got that right. Okay, anybody have any comments you want to make, address the board? You guys heard all tonight like we did last time. Okay,
So did you resolve your thing in your closed session?
resolve, talk about it.
Are you allowed to tell us what it was about it? You can't tell us what we discussed.
I wouldn't think so.
It's like only our business and we pay taxes, but we can't know.
It says right on the agenda.
It's a legal issue, so I mean, just bring this to this.
Oh, please. I have a question.
You got
Do
public
I need to go to the mic, or can I just stay right here? Because this was regarding the culvert that I have been very concerned about over a long period of time. And I have been asking for 6 months what this contract was that I was told that it's gonna transpire. Is there no contract yet, and this is what you guys are discussing? Or is it something else to do with the culvert?
Village and golf course agreement.
I can read, thank you, that wasn't my question.
We haven't got a contract. You're asking us.
Because, well, I'm asking because like in September, I was told that there was this new agreement between the village and the golf course. So then in December, I asked for a copy of that agreement, and I was told by Jackie that it was at the attorney's
That's not
office.
free. I know.
But then I asked again last month, and I was told again it was with the attorney's office. So nothing at all has ever been done. We're just now that it's spring discussing it.
That's why we had our attorney meeting.
Okay.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah, you got public comment.
When it comes time to decide what method by which it is that we're gonna take care of the drain, is that gonna be something that we the public are gonna get to vote on? Or you guys are just gonna decide and we live with it?
I think the Drain Commission decides.
Just the drain commission.
Yeah, the drain, that's why the meeting, we're trying to get a meeting with Jeff Wright.
Okay.
Because ultimately, Jeff Wright, if nothing would happen, if we didn't do this green infrastructure,
Right.
Jeff Wright would say, all right, what I'm going to do now is have another meeting for the public, and at that meeting, I will tell you how we're going to split the pie, who's going to pay when, and how much.
All right.
With this now, if they meet him, he agrees that this is the appropriate way to approach this, he will again have that meeting, but he won't be talking about the 2 different projects that the engineering companies recommended. If he agrees to this, then you would say, yes, and this is the way, instead of $1 million, it could be $200,000. And this is how we'll split the pie.